Okay, so I'm going to try and not stand in front of Kim and not make the cameraman's work difficult either. Okay, so today we're actually going to start at the end and with your permission we'll proceed to the beginning. So we actually want to show you some results of an approach that we're kind of in love with ourselves, but you may not necessarily be so. So we'll seek your permission along the way as we go. So we'll start with some results in a non-specific rehab context where this same method has worked in different durations with different types of problems. Then we'll move on to define what the actual approach is from the difference between a problem and a program-centric approach. And then we're actually going to specify that in a rehab context from an intervention that we applied in a federal government agency. And then we're going to discuss how you can build operational capability to deliver that kind of approach. And that's where we'll start today. So just a quick overview of a couple of different examples to show the utility of the approach. And again, starting with the results rather than the method. So the challenge for this team was they were delivering a risk control function. The operational tempo was unsustainable, which is probably quite familiar to anyone working in government. Their key data was not captured, and potentially the bits that were captured weren't recognised or utilised. And the decisions they made were based on personal preferences or sort of forced decisions at points in time in that unsustainable operational environment. So we designed a profiling tool, took 5,000 service requests and reduced them by 10 times. We defined a service entry point, so triaging right at that first point of entry to the service and prioritising cases through that process as well. The first contact instigated a standardised assessment suite so that we actually had capability to then capture data, utilise data and use that downstream as well, and implementing a fully defined service criteria at that point. So we found data, found multiple points of data, collated those points of data and increased the validity and the understanding around the importance of using it. And then we're able to obviously, for the first time, give some strategic oversight, which is always really important in locking in your authorising environment to your mission. So just another quick one. This one is in relation to the National Innovation and Science Agenda. So they're tasked with creating public value around the government's public data policy statement. So they needed a really quite quick but reliable uplift in the capability of data for their workforce. And teaching people about data is not always the most riveting thing to do or the easiest thing to convince them they need to do. So they were working from an unassessed baseline also and various degrees of capability and competency, a very large range. So in the implementation and looking at the problem through the approach that we like to apply, we were able to achieve data literacy for 100 plus staff members. They saw a 275% increase in confidence, which when using data for storytelling and for driving your operation and approach is really confidence around your data is one of the most important things as a data steward. A 125% increase in the ability to visualise and build reports and story around the data they were utilising and being confident that it was correct. And a 525% increase in ability to maintain their own data sets to a standard of governance that was defined now. Okay, so but what about for this audience? Would your organisation benefit if you could decrease your future liabilities by 26%? Your premium comes down by 30%. You've decreased your health case throughput, so just number of cases. The duration of a case decreases and you're getting people back to work in that opportune window of the 12-week period. Your claims are decreasing, your duration of your claims is also decreasing, so again you're not attracting all those secondary types of conditions and complexities that occur when you get involved in someone's life for any length of time. The operational staffing actually shifts from that. So what you're seeing there is the shift of the operational staffing from required to be in that task-based, specific, automated, repetitive-based work over to an operational capacity uplift into the more future-proofing the actual service and process. And the workers actually started to like you again. Would that be of benefit?
So, touching on some of those results, they are real. Would you like to take a deeper look? Yes? You can say yes. Show of hands.
Okay, we warned you.
Okay. Meet Corey. Corey's a case manager, and all he wants to do is get people back to work in their original jobs and have them stay well at work. But life isn't great for Corey at work. It's chaotic, it's reactive, he's really time poor, everything's unstructured, and he feels really disempowered. He can't make the decisions he needs to make. Does anybody know Corey? Maybe some of us have even been Corey. He's frustrated because his priorities are really unclear. Seems like cases never close, they just keep building up. He's got some great ideas, but they're often overlooked. Managers don't really trust him to do his role. He's not actually confident with his own decisions, and he really doesn't have control over his work and no real process and guidance to work by. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have some elements that maybe if we started to touch on could possibly change that day at work for Corey. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Fiona's a frontline manager in the same agency, and as a people leader, she feels very unsupported. Just like Corey, she's time poor, she's overwhelmed, she feels really isolated, and all of her work is reactive. She's not consulted on major changes, she's frustrated. She's actually not really allowed to manage her people in the way she needs to, and she's really unclear what the people management processes actually are. And when she does go to human resources, the advice she gets is conflicting and quite different. Corey and Fiona are working to solve a really important problem. They're looking to reduce financial and human cost of workplace injury and illness, and they want to do that through a person-centred approach. Sounds very valid, it's an important mission. Some of us are probably working on that right now. We've done the research, and when it comes to looking at problems, we think Dilbert sums it up best. Starting next week, all our meetings will be stand-ups with no chairs, so we'll be more focused. So we examined all of the problems in the company and decided the root cause was chairs. We're also loosening the dress code. So our problems are chairs and pants. What are we actually trying to solve? And there are two fundamental ways we can actually look at our problems and how we try to tackle them. Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about program versus problem-centric, but we haven't really defined it. So at the high level, this notion of splitting the way you work actually comes from the theory of operations that was put out by Harvard professor Malcolm Sparrow, who is a world-renowned expert in regulation. So we've adapted some of his work and thinking behind this approach. Program-centric is the way we normally solve problems. Our agency has existing structures, processes, people. We take a problem and we push it through that machinery that we've already got and hope it gets solved. On the other side of that is a problem-centric approach, where you actually start to break down really big problems into more meaningful, smaller chunks and actually marshal the resources you need around that problem so you know you can solve it. And you manage it as a risk-based project. You'll know when you're finished and you will close the project. So what traditionally happens, we can see it's an intentionally a comical kapow, if you remember from the old sort of Batman, Superman type comics, because it's something that we need to explode and do more work on. It's big, it's bad, it's very broad, and it's vague. We don't really know what it is. So generally it'll be collectively defined, uniform across an industry or a sector, and it normally appears through some form of financial impact. And generally we have a traditional response, normally a task force, multifaceted, get a lot of people together to work on the problem. So that's the program type approach.
Mm-hmm. So I guess continuing on with the way Sparrow kind of works through this is to consider that then that comes back into our agencies which have, this is the structure relevant to this particular issue that we're talking to you about today, but I don't think the representation of the organisational structure is going to be that different looking across the government. So we tend to force that problem then, as big and vague and broad as it is, normally with a remit in relation to demonstrating results quite quickly because of the financial impact that's flagged it on the, in the minds of our ministers or our senior executives in terms of doing something about this. So we take the problem and we force it back through this traditional structure, which, most of the time will deal with the more general aspects of the problem and the more defined aspects that we've known for a long time. It's possibly why we built these structures in the first place and why they all look really similar across organisations. I guess what Kim has introduced when she's talked about the idea of cutting it into pieces and exploding the problem further is to say, do we need it to go that way, or can we maybe start down in this bottom left-hand corner and start to cut and slice the problem in different ways before we actually take it on that route through our traditional functional structures. And if we did, what would it look like? So it might start to look something like this. It possibly even looks more detailed depending on how you look at it and what slice you want to take and what the particular focus or remit is at this point in time based on your agency's mission, the government focus, agenda. It might be something more specific in each area as well. So this is not by any stretch a full definition yet of what our problem or what Corey and Fiona's problem is. Okay, but what we're suggesting to you is think about taking that layer and now working that back through the opposite direction. Okay, so we're actually going to ask our structures to be more fluid and break down maybe some of their boundaries to work more fluidly across the problem and use centralised sources of data and information that we perhaps don't connect through those traditional functional processes. Okay, so we're now looking at that problem definition and saying, I'm not sure if Corey and Fiona actually feel like they're achieving that outcome, but if we go back to this and we started to look at some of these pieces and started to work on a strategy to address those pieces, they could start to feel a very strong sense of working towards an outcome on that particular broad definition of the problem. Okay. This is what the problem might start to look like if we define it from that bottom quadrant. So the bottom left-hand quadrant, we start to break down the definition, we start to get more tangible in terms of the information we're looking for, the pieces we're looking to tweak, the power and tools that we're giving to our people are quite specific when you look at these. And this is a snapshot. So in the actual intervention, the problem definition was 8 pages long. I think in terms of the theory of operations and Professor Sparrow's rule, he is extremely sceptical if your problem definition is less than 20 pages long. He actually doesn't believe that you've fully defined the problem if it's less than 20 pages. Ours was 8. I think we've managed to convince him that we were tackling important problems, which is another one of his mandates, so we were able to win on that count. So you start to look at reducing the volume of non-compensable health cases where the case does not meet the criteria for health case management. It's really specific. Corey can really start to tackle that problem. Corey can start to look at the tools that he has or his team members have and say, can I address this, or do I need another tool? Or is there somewhere else in the department that has a tool that's going to help me? Or is there data sitting elsewhere? So you start to see the intricacy of the layers that you can start to put together when you don't push it through your formal functional silos. Right.
So we've started to define our problem. Now let's focus in on some of the methods and different lenses that we might apply when actually starting to pick it apart. So this is our representation of the strategic public management model, often known as Moore's strategic triangle, based on the work of Professor Mark Moore. I think it was originally put out sort of 20 or 30 years ago. And it's the notion that in order to have an effective operation, there are three key pillars or components that you need to have balanced. Represented as the legs of the stool, the authorising environment, that's your sources of legitimacy and support, what gives you the mandate to do the work you do. Public value, so that's the good you're trying to create or the services you're delivering, your agency's mission. And operational capability, everything you need to actually get the job done and deliver on that value. So it includes things like people, processes, tools, systems, information technology, ability to and authority to make decisions. So we represent it as a stool because if any one leg is missing, it's really not a comfortable day at work trying to actually get the job done. Operational capability is somewhat like, if anyone's familiar with Jenga, that kind of brick puzzle, where all the different pieces of capability are a different piece in the puzzle. And if you pull one out or one's missing, potentially the whole leg collapses. So for the purposes of the intervention, most of the work takes place in that operational capability area. Mm-hmm. So I guess we've started to define the problem. We can see some of the smaller areas we might be focusing in on, but where do you actually start? So for the purposes of actually addressing it, we've given a list of 8 actions. It's important to note that these aren't necessarily sequential, and it's iterative and incremental. You'll be going around this process multiple times, and each time you do, you'll be dropping another piece of capability uplift. And we've mapped them across the public value, the authorising environment, and the operational capability, the legs of the stool. So we're really focusing on number 6, looking at baselining our operational capability and what that looks like as we start to build up the pieces that are needed to address those smaller problems.
Mm-hmm. So Kim talked about the Jenga pieces. So each element here is a Jenga piece in the operational capability leg of the stool. Okay, so each parts of this are actually required by Corey and Fiona in the delivery of their work. The radar graph here obviously represents their maturity across those. So they seem to have a reasonable sense of maturity, a level 4, that they seem to understand what their authority might be within their particular role. Then you step across and you look at operational authority, and it's next to sort of undefined and reactive. So there's going to be a big mismatch, and a lot of role satisfaction will be missing for Corey in that circumstance, because while Corey has a really strong sense of where authority in relation to undertaking his role lies, the rest of the organisation and structures around him don't. So that's a conflict. The aim with that iterative and repetitive process of those 8 steps that Kim referenced would be that each time you go around or step back, it's deliberate, it's structured, and you're doing it for a reason, to build maturity on one of those elements. So that's the iterative nature of the process, and that's what you want to be doing. You want to be continually going around. Luckily, as you go around and build capability, you build confidence and you build a sense of satisfaction. So it's not a feeling of being on like a guinea pig on a treadmill. Okay, so what tends to happen for Corey in this circumstance, and these are actually, the information on these graphs, on these slides, is actually real data from workshops and assessments that we did with the team. So Corey had very defined pain points when you think about the elements in the Jenga leg, the operational capability leg. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to go to the highest pain point for Corey and Corey's colleagues at that point in time, because otherwise Corey's not coming on board with you. He is not coming on a iterative change, transformation process yet again. You're promising me nothing. I'm not coming with you. So what you want to do is you want to find out what the biggest pain is for Corey, and you want to target that, and you want to cross your fingers that you're using your data, you're slicing your problem in that really specific way. You've got such a good understanding of it that you can actually release some pain quite quickly for Corey, because then Corey's with you. And then Corey's taking on the charge and driving the agenda. You're not dragging him. So we did that and realised quite quickly that whilst Corey was really clear about his authority, he actually didn't provide a lot of evidence or information to support it, which potentially links to other people's understanding of his authority in that role. So decision-making authority related to his role was something that, from a regulatory perspective, he was accountable for, and we needed to quickly help him actually deliver that to the capability required of the role. That obviously links to the tools and capabilities, so you start to see that we targeted those elements really quickly, really early, and very specifically. It wasn't random. You start to build business process around that and start to make it visible and audible so that Corey and team members, colleagues, can actually apply it over and over again. So they're not reinventing the wheel when a new case or a new type of incident or a new type of job presents before them. They know what they're doing. They know what the service standards are. They know what they're trying to deliver to their customer. What then tends to happen is you grab those pieces, as I said, and Corey's on the journey with you. So you've got to catch Corey. He's actually ahead of you. And this did happen with this team. They were well ahead of us in a lot of areas, pushing. So as quickly as we could build pieces and components, they were asking and they were telling us what they wanted next. And that's what tends to happen. They build it themselves through their excitement and now satisfaction and level of control that they're feeling. You've stripped out a lot of the repetitive and automated sort of process attached to the role, the stuff they don't like. You've given back authority and decision-making capability. So they're now feeling more correct, and these words were from a post-workshop with Corey's team. They're in control, they're structured, authorised, courageous, risk-based. Each case is a risk management project that I can manage to closure. And Fiona, it was the same thing. It was different elements that we had to focus on for Fiona. She's a frontline manager, she's leading a team of people, but she feels like she has no authority to decision make in relation to that. Focused in on those areas specifically. Again, you give them what they actually really, really want and are telling you they want at that point in time. You start to build momentum, and it was the same. It wasn't necessarily planned. It definitely was very nice to see happen. Again, we start to build the capability in those specific areas that are causing them pain, and you start to get a shift in all the other areas.
Sounds like a lot of work. Well, it is, but by following the method, you're actually tackling it problem by problem. So the project itself is obviously one of the larger pieces and multiple problems that we were working on. It was done over a 12-month period, and that was in conjunction to the team delivering business as usual functions. So the results that were achieved through it, this represents future workers' compensation liabilities over an 18-month period that aligned with the 12 months of the project. You can see it starts at 21.7 million and has been reduced down to 14.9, so within a 12-month work period. So it's quite significant in terms of the impact. Yep. So the shadow that Lisa's just overlaid is what I like to call the do-nothing, shadow of doom. So if this intervention and project hadn't occurred, this is the prediction of where the future liabilities would have been based on case decisions. So it would have been up closer to $30 million.
Okay, so I guess just our insights from the approach broadly, but also the specifics in relation to rehab. So quickly recognise, react and identify, rectify your mistakes. So if you head into those conversations with Corey and Fiona and you think you've got an idea but you haven't actually really listened to them and you've missed that particular point, you'll soon work it out because they won't actually be right behind you, and you'll need to debug that and work out why. You need to celebrate positive changes. So obviously our results are, aimed to inspire the audience. So we've given you the big ticket items today, but there were little ones, and all of those need to be celebrated amongst your team really regularly to reinforce that we're actually incrementally working through these steps. We're getting somewhere. We hadn't done this 6 months ago. Now we actually have a formal process for closure of cases, and you can you can close and move that on and not think about that again. It's as simple as that. Maintain a level of humility and be prepared to make sacrifices. Be assured of your non-negotiables and reassess them. They will change. As you work your way back through that iterative and incremental process, it will change. What you need to lock in, what you need to be thinking about, what you need to be scanning your environment for, it changes. Capture and recapture via strategic intervention. This is possibly in relation mostly to your authorising environment, which will shift with some kind of mission shift of the government or your agency, and you'll need to relink them in, which may be, again, slicing your data in a slightly different way to tell them the story related to their new venture. Scan and remain vigilant and have some fun and insert possibility. Thank you.